Judge William Carter was a man of power, wealth, and influence. At 63, he had spent decades on the bench, shaping Florida's justice system with an iron fist. Respected in courtrooms and admired in high society, he was a man who seemed untouchable. To the outside world, he had it all: a long and successful career, a beautiful mansion in Palm Beach, and a loving family. But behind the elegant walls of his estate, Judge Carter harbored a dangerous secret, an affair that would shatter his world. His son, Daniel Carter, was married to a stunning young woman named Olivia. At 28, Olivia was the perfect image of grace and charm. She was intelligent, ambitious, and deeply in love with her husband. When she and Daniel announced they were expecting their first child, the Carter family celebrated with joy. However, William had long desired Olivia in ways no father-in-law should. At first, it was subtle: compliments on her beauty, lingering glances, a hand resting too long on her back. Then as time passed, he found ways to be alone with her. The affair started as a mistake, one drunken night that should have never happened, but it didn't stop there. For months they met in secret, sneaking into hotels and empty houses, indulging in their forbidden passion. Olivia, young and naive, convinced herself it was just an escape, something exciting before she fully committed to motherhood. William, on the other hand, was obsessed. He felt alive in her presence, drawn to her youth and beauty. Then came the devastating news. Olivia, now 6 months pregnant, tested positive for HIV during a routine checkup. Her world crumbled. The doctors assured her that with medication, the baby could be protected, but the betrayal was unbearable. She had only been with two men, her husband and his father. She confronted William in a panic. "It's you! You gave this to me!" she screamed, tears running down her face. "You destroyed my life!" Judge Carter was in shock. He had been careful, or so he thought. But deep inside, he knew she was right. He had been with other women before Olivia, paid escorts, secret lovers. Somewhere along the way, he had contracted the virus, and now he had infected his unborn grandchild's mother. "You can't tell anyone," William pleaded, his voice trembling. "This will ruin everything." But Olivia wasn't listening. She was going to tell Daniel. And that was when the idea formed in William's mind. If Olivia told his son, his career, his reputation, everything would be over. The scandal would destroy his legacy, and worse, he could face criminal charges. No, he couldn't let that happen. That night, as the waves crashed against the shore outside his mansion, Judge William Carter decided there was only one way out. Olivia had to die. Judge William Carter sat in his dimly lit study, a glass of bourbon in his trembling hand. The weight of his mistake crushed him like an avalanche. Olivia knew the truth, and if she told Daniel, his life would be over. His reputation, his career, everything he had built would be destroyed in an instant. He had spent decades controlling the fate of others, but now fate had turned against him. She cannot be allowed to ruin me. It was a cruel thought, but the more he considered it, the more it made sense. If Olivia disappeared, there would be no scandal, no humiliation. His son would grieve, but time would heal that. He would never know the truth. William leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, thinking carefully. He had sentenced men to death before. He understood how detectives worked, what mistakes criminals made. He needed to be smarter. A clean, accidental death. No evidence, no suspicion. The next day, he called Olivia. His voice was calm, calculated. "We need to talk, face to face. I know you're upset, but we need to figure this out like adults." Olivia hesitated. She wanted nothing more than to expose him, to tell Daniel everything. But a part of her wanted closure, to see if he had any remorse, any way to fix what he had done. "Fine," she said. "But after this, I'm done. I'm telling Daniel the truth." William forced himself to remain calm. "Of course, just come by the beach house tonight. No interruptions, just us." Olivia agreed. William knew this house well. It was his private retreat, isolated, away from prying eyes. The perfect place to commit the perfect crime. That evening, Olivia arrived at the beach house, her expression hardened. She wore a flowing white dress that clung to her pregnant belly, her eyes filled with pain and anger. William greeted her at the door, a rehearsed look of concern on his face. "Come inside," he said, stepping aside. She entered cautiously. The house was eerily quiet, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filling the air. "You ruined my life," she spat. "You ruined my child's life." "I know," he said, his voice low. "And I'm sorry. I truly am." For a moment, Olivia hesitated. Maybe, just maybe, he actually felt guilt. Maybe he would confess and let her go. That's when she noticed the bottle of wine on the table, 2 glasses poured. "You think alcohol will fix this?" She scoffed. "It's just to calm the nerves," he said smoothly, handing her a glass. "For one last conversation." She took it reluctantly, sipping it as she glared at him. They talked for an hour. He let her vent, let her curse him, let her cry. All the while, the drug he had slipped into her drink was taking effect. Olivia's eyelids grew heavy. Her words started to slur. I I feel weird. Just relax," William said softly. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the couch, her breathing shallow. William's heart pounded. It was working. He picked up a pillow from the couch. It had to look natural. No strangulation marks. No evidence of foul play. As Olivia struggled weakly, he pressed the pillow over her face. She thrashed for only a few moments before the drugs and lack of oxygen took their final toll. Then, silence. William pulled the pillow away, staring at her lifeless body. The woman who had once been his lover, his son's wife, the mother of his unborn grandchild, was now just a corpse. He had done it. Now he had to make sure no one ever suspected him. Judge William Carter stood over Olivia's lifeless body, his heartbeat steadying as the reality of what he had done sank in. There was no turning back now. He had silenced her, but if he didn't cover his tracks perfectly, everything would be for nothing. "Think like an investigator," he told himself. "Eliminate all evidence. Create a perfect story." First, he took a deep breath and checked Olivia's pulse one last time. Nothing. Her body was limp, her lips slightly parted as if caught mid-sentence. The drugs had done their job, and the suffocation left no obvious bruising. He lifted her gently, cradling her as if she were still alive. Carrying her to the bathroom, he turned on the shower, letting the warm water run. He needed to remove any signs of struggle. Carefully, he stripped off her dress and washed her body with a towel, making sure there were no traces of his fingerprints on her skin. Next, he dressed her in fresh clothes, an old t-shirt and sweatpants he kept at the beach house for guests. It had to look as though she had come here alone, seeking refuge in a familiar place. Once she was dressed, he set the final scene. He took the empty wine glass and placed it carefully on the coffee table, making sure it had only her fingerprints. Then he retrieved her phone from her purse. He unlocked it using her fingerprint. He had seen her do it enough times to know how. Quickly, he typed a message to Daniel. "I need some time alone. At the beach house. Don't worry, love you." Satisfied, he placed the phone back into her bag and left it beside the couch. He then pulled out his own phone and called 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Judge William Carter," he said, his voice steady but laced with forced panic. "I just arrived at my beach house and, oh my God, my daughter-in-law, she's here and she's not breathing. Sir, is she responsive? No, she's cold, she's—" He let his voice break slightly. "Please send someone now. Help is on the way. Do you know if she had any medical conditions?" "She was pregnant," he said, adding a sob for effect. She said she needed some time alone. I thought she was just stressed." "Oh God, Daniel. My son. Sir, stay on the line. Help is coming." But William had already ended the call. When the paramedics arrived, they found him sitting on the couch, his hands covering his face, looking every bit the grieving father-in-law. The lead paramedic, a tall woman with sharp eyes, checked Olivia's vitals. "She's been gone for at least an hour," she said quietly to her partner. "No signs of a struggle. Could be an overdose or natural causes." William listened intently, letting out a shuddering sigh. I should have checked on her sooner." A police officer approached him. "Judge Carter, I know this is difficult, but we need to ask some questions. When was the last time you saw her?" "Yesterday," he said, his voice hoarse. She said she needed space. I didn't want to bother her. I never thought. He trailed off, shaking his head. Did she have any history of depression? Not that I knew of, he lied. She was under a lot of stress, though. The pregnancy, her relationship with Daniel. It hasn't been easy. The officer nodded, making notes. Do you mind staying in town for a few days? Just in case we need a follow-up? Of course, William said. Anything to help. As they took Olivia's body away, William exhaled slowly. The hardest part was done, or so he thought, because watching everything from the crowd of first responders was Detective Marcus Reed. And something about this scene didn't sit right with him. Detective Marcus Reed had been in law enforcement for over 20 years. He had seen every kind of crime, murders made to look like suicides, overdoses that were really poisonings, and so many perfect lies that fell apart under scrutiny. And something about Olivia Carter's death didn't sit right with him. Standing outside the beach house, he watched as the paramedics loaded Olivia's body into the ambulance. He had been called in as a formality, but his instincts told him this was no simple tragedy. He turned his gaze to Judge William Carter, who sat on the porch, his head in his hands. A picture of grief, a man who had just lost his son's wife, his grandchild's mother. Too perfect. Reed had worked cases involving the judge before. The man was powerful, calculated, and always seemed to be 10 steps ahead of everyone else. But even the most careful people made mistakes, and Reed was going to find them. Reed walked up to Officer Jenkins, the first responder on the scene. What do we have? Jenkins sighed. Judge Carter called it in, says he found her like this when he arrived. No signs of forced entry, no visible trauma. Looks like an overdose or maybe natural causes. Reed raised an eyebrow. Natural causes? She was young, healthy, and pregnant. Unlikely. Jenkins shrugged. Could be stress. Could be anything. The ME will confirm. Reed stepped into the house, taking in the details. A single wine glass on the coffee table. A phone neatly placed in her purse. The couch cushion slightly indented as if she had been sitting there. Too neat. Too arranged. He looked at Olivia's phone and frowned. Has anyone checked her messages? Not yet, Jenkins admitted. We were waiting on a warrant. Reed pulled on gloves and carefully picked up the phone. He turned it on, scrolling through the last messages. The last text to Daniel. I need some time alone. At the beach house. Don't worry, love you. It felt rehearsed. He had worked domestic cases before. People in distress didn't text like that. No typos, no emotional breakdown. Just a neat, clean message. And then something else caught his eye. She hadn't checked any messages after that. No social media activity, no calls. If she had come here willingly, why wasn't she on her phone? His gut told him the message was sent after she was already dead. Reed stepped back outside where William Carter was wiping his eyes. The act was good. Too good. Judge Carter, Reed said gently, I know this is difficult, but I have a few questions. The older man nodded. Of course, Detective. Anything you need. When was the last time you spoke to Olivia? Yesterday, William said, voice thick with grief. She told me she needed space, so I didn't push her. That's very understanding of you, Reed said. Did she seem upset? Yes, but she had been struggling. With what exactly? William sighed. Her marriage wasn't perfect. Daniel and Olivia had issues. The pregnancy was unexpected, and she felt overwhelmed. Reed tilted his head. Did Daniel know she was here? Number. She didn't want to worry him. How did you know she was here? William hesitated, just for a second, but Reed caught it. She mentioned it before? William said smoothly. And when I didn't hear from her, I decided to check on her. I never expected to find this. A pause, a well-timed shake of the head. The perfect grieving father-in-law. But Reed wasn't buying it. You arrived, found her unresponsive, and called 911 immediately? Yes, you didn't touch anything. Just check for a pulse. Reed nodded, filing away every response. Of course, we'll get to the bottom of this. William sighed. Thank you, Detective. Reed turned to leave, but before he did, he made one last observation. The judge's shirt sleeves, faintly creased, as if they had been rolled up recently, like someone trying to clean up a mess. Back at the station, Reed pulled up Olivia's medical history. Something about this case gnawed at him. He was looking for anything that would confirm his suspicion. Then he found it. Olivia Carter had been diagnosed with HIV. Reed froze. She was pregnant. She was married to Daniel. But she had HIV, and she had never told her husband. This wasn't just an affair. This was something much, much bigger. And Reed had a feeling that Judge Carter knew exactly how it happened. Detective Marcus Reed sat at his desk, staring at Olivia Carter's medical records. His gut had told him something was off, but this was a bombshell. Olivia Carter had HIV. Reed rubbed his temples. She was pregnant, which meant Daniel might have been infected too. But what bothered him most was the question how she got it. Her husband was a healthy young man. No prior infections, no history of drug use. If Olivia had contracted HIV, someone else had given it to her. And there was one man who stood out, Judge William Carter. The judge had wealth, power, and influence. But more than that, he had motive. If Olivia had been infected through an affair, and the judge was involved, this was more than a simple case of infidelity. This was murder. Reed called Daniel Carter to the station. When the young man arrived, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were swollen, his hands trembling. "I need to ask you some difficult questions," Reed said. Daniel swallowed hard. "I just buried my wife, Detective. Can we do this later?" "I understand, but I need to know, was Olivia seeing someone else?" Daniel's face darkened. "Why would you ask that?" Reed studied him carefully. "Did she ever mention anything strange? Medical issues? Illnesses?" Daniel frowned. She was healthy." Reed exhaled. "Daniel, Olivia had HIV." Daniel's face went white. His body stiffened as he leaned forward. "That's impossible. It's the truth," Reed said gently. "We need to find out how she got it." Daniel's breathing turned rapid. "Are you saying she cheated on me?" Reed didn't answer. He let the silence fill the room. Daniel ran his fingers through his hair. No way. Olivia would never." "Did she have any close relationships that made you uncomfortable?" Daniel hesitated. For the first time, real doubt crossed his face. "There was someone," he admitted. "But it wasn't an affair. It couldn't have been." Reed leaned in. "Who?" Daniel exhaled shakily. "My father." The words hung heavy in the air. Reed kept his expression neutral. "What do you mean?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Olivia and my dad were close. Too close sometimes. I told myself it was just him being supportive. But now," his voice trailed off. Reed pulled out his notepad. "Did you ever see anything inappropriate?" Daniel shook his head. "But I remember coming home one night, and she was on the phone. She hung up real fast when I walked in. I checked the call log later. It was my dad." Reed jotted that down. "Did you ever ask her about it?" "Yeah," Daniel whispered. "She said he was just giving her advice about the baby. But I knew something felt wrong." Reed nodded. "Did your father know Olivia was pregnant?" "Of course," Daniel scoffed. "Why?" "Because if William Carter was sleeping with Olivia and found out she was pregnant, it would mean one thing. He wasn't sure who the father was." Reed left the interrogation room with a new mission. If Judge Carter had been seeing Olivia, there would be proof. He pulled up Olivia's bank records. If she had been in an affair, there would be expenses, hotel rooms, gifts, unexplained deposits. And there it was. Over the past year, large sums of money had been transferred to Olivia's account. The sender? William Carter. Reed's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an affair. The judge had been paying her. For silence. Reed wasted no time. He drove straight to William Carter's estate. The judge opened the door looking exhausted. "Detective Reed, what now?" Reed didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need to talk. Inside." Carter hesitated but stepped aside. Reed walked in and placed Olivia's bank records on the table. "You were giving her money." Carter barely reacted. "She was family. She needed help." Reed nodded. "Help for what? The baby?" or to keep her quiet. Carter's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're implying, Detective, but You slept with your son's wife, Reed said bluntly. The color drained from the judge's face. You infected her with HIV. She got pregnant. And when she threatened to expose you, you killed her. Carter shot up. That's absurd. Reed took a step forward. You called 911 claiming you found her dead. But I don't think you did. I think you killed her, sent the text from her phone, and staged the scene. Carter shook his head. I won't listen to this. You rolled up your sleeves before calling the cops. Why? Reed pressed. Carter froze. You cleaned up something, didn't you? Silence. Carter's hands clenched into fists. You have no proof. Reed smirked. Not yet, but I will. Reed left the judge's house and called his team. Get a search warrant. Bring in forensics. I want his house, his car, his clothes, everything. A few hours later, they found what they needed. In the judge's bathroom, buried at the bottom of a laundry bin, they found a shirt. Blood-stained. It was Olivia's. And just like that, the truth was coming out. Judge William Carter sat in his grand study, his hands trembling as he poured himself a glass of whiskey. The walls of his perfect life were closing in fast. Detective Reed was relentless, and now the forensic team was combing through his estate like vultures picking at a carcass. He had spent decades building an untouchable reputation, but now it was all unraveling because of one mistake: falling for Olivia. No, it wasn't love. It was obsession. He had always been a man of control, power, and discipline. But when Olivia came into their family, something shifted. She was young, beautiful, full of life, everything his own marriage lacked. At first it was innocent. Conversations at dinner, occasional texts checking in on her pregnancy. But then it escalated. Late-night phone calls, secret meetings, passion, and then the nightmare. Back at the police lab, Detective Reed examined the blood-stained shirt found in the judge's home. The preliminary DNA results had just come in. It was Olivia's blood. But there was something else. Hairs. Some were Olivia's, but others. Reed had them tested immediately. When the results came back, he wasn't surprised. Judge William Carter's DNA was all over that shirt. Reed exhaled slowly. We've got him. His partner, Detective Anna Lopez, nodded. Let's bring him in before he tries to disappear. At 10:45 p.m., Reed and a team of officers arrived at the judge's mansion. The grand estate, once a symbol of prestige, now felt cold and haunted. They knocked. No answer. Reed nodded to an officer, who kicked the door open. They found Carter in his study, sitting behind his desk, a pistol resting beside his whiskey glass. You really think I'd go down without a fight? Carter muttered, his voice hollow. Reed kept his gun drawn, but took a cautious step forward. It's over, Judge. We have the evidence. Olivia's blood was on your shirt. Carter let out a low chuckle. That doesn't mean I killed her. Reed slammed a folder on the desk. We also have your financial records, the payments to Olivia, the hidden texts, and your DNA at the crime scene. You were sleeping with your son's wife, and when she threatened to expose you, you killed her. Carter's face darkened. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Reed's jaw tightened. Then tell me what happened. Carter sighed, rubbing his face. It started as an affair, he admitted. At first she resisted, but I wore her down, promised her security, protection. She was vulnerable, pregnant, and scared. I was there for her. Reed clenched his fists. She was your son's wife. Carter ignored the comment. But then she found out about the HIV, he continued. She was devastated. She demanded to know if I had it. I lied, told her it must have been Daniel, but she didn't believe me. She threatened to tell everyone. The media, my wife, my son. His voice cracked. She said she'd ruin me. Reed's eyes narrowed. So you silenced her? Carter looked away. I didn't plan to. That night I went to talk to her. She was furious, calling me a monster. She said she'd go public the next day. I panicked, tried to calm her down, but she just kept screaming. His hands trembled. I grabbed her. She fought back. I pushed her. She hit her head on the kitchen counter. Silence. Reed's stomach twisted. And then? Carter exhaled. I thought she was unconscious, but when I checked, she wasn't breathing. I tried CPR, nothing. And that's when I knew. It was over. Everything I had built, destroyed. Reed's voice was ice. So you staged the scene, sent the text from her phone to make it look like a suicide. Carter nodded, defeated. But the evidence never lies, Reed said. The blood, the shirt, the financials. You covered your tracks, but not well enough. Carter let out a slow, bitter laugh. I guess I was never as smart as I thought. Reed took a step closer. Judge William Carter, you are under arrest for the murder of Olivia Carter. The once powerful judge didn't resist as the officers cuffed him. His legacy was over. News of Judge Carter's arrest exploded across Florida. The media had a field day. A respected judge caught in a web of betrayal, murder, and scandal. Daniel Carter, shattered by the truth, refused to speak to his father ever again. His wife was gone. His child was gone. His own father had destroyed his life. And Detective Reed? He closed his notebook, staring at the confession. It was a case that would haunt him for years. But justice had been served. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, legal analysts, and the general public filled every available seat. The trial of Judge William Carter was the biggest legal scandal Florida had seen in years. A respected man of the law now sitting on the defendant's bench, accused of murdering his son's pregnant wife. The prosecution was relentless. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, financial records, text messages, and, most damning of all, Carter's own confession. But Carter's legal team was prepared for war. Carter's attorney, James Holloway, was a master at courtroom theatrics. His opening argument was simple. This was a tragic accident, not a murder. Holloway painted Carter as a desperate man caught in a bad situation. Olivia Carter was emotionally unstable, he argued. She had just discovered she was HIV positive, and she didn't know who to blame. She lashed out at my client. He simply tried to calm her down, and in the struggle, she fell and hit her head. A terrible accident, but not a murder. The judge watched from the bench, expressionless. He had once commanded a courtroom. Now he was at its mercy. The lead prosecutor, Sarah Whitman, didn't hold back. She played the 911 call in court. The voice of Olivia's friend, the one who had discovered her body, echoed through the room. She's not breathing. Oh my God, there's blood. So much blood. The jury members flinched. Then came the forensic evidence. The blood on Carter's shirt, the bruises on Olivia's arms showing a struggle, the staged suicide text, and then the most damning testimony of all, Detective Reed. Reed walked to the witness stand with confidence. He had built the case carefully, and now it was time to deliver the final blow. Detective, the prosecutor began, in your professional opinion, was Olivia Carter's death an accident? Reed didn't hesitate. Number Holloway stood. Objection, speculation, sustained, the judge ruled. Whitman rephrased. Can you explain why? Reed nodded. Based on forensic evidence, Olivia Carter didn't simply fall. There were signs of a struggle. Bruises on her wrists and arms suggest she was restrained. And most importantly, the blood spatter pattern was inconsistent with a simple fall. It suggests she was struck before hitting the counter. The jury took notes. The courtroom was silent. Then Whitman delivered the final strike. Detective Reed, in your investigation, did you uncover any evidence that Judge Carter had a motive to kill Olivia? Reed nodded. Yes. Olivia Carter had discovered that she was HIV positive. She suspected Judge Carter had infected her. She threatened to expose their affair. He had everything to lose. His career, his family, his reputation. And so he silenced her. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. The motive was clear. It took the jury 3 hours to deliberate. When they returned, Judge Carter sat still, hands folded. The foreman stood. The room held its breath. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps filled the room. Carter closed his eyes. His empire, his name, his legacy, all gone. The judge banged the gavel. William Carter, you are sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. As Carter was led away in handcuffs, the world watched. Daniel Carter never attended the sentencing. He had already said goodbye to his father the moment he learned the truth. His wife was dead. His child was never born. His father had betrayed him in the worst way possible. Detective Reed stood outside the courthouse watching the reporters scramble to cover the biggest scandal in Florida's legal history. Justice had been served, but there was no victory in this case, only tragedy. As Reed walked away, he couldn't help but think, power doesn't make you untouchable. Secrets always come to light, and in the end, the truth always wins.